Ever wish you could predict the future?
Especially when it comes to AI.
Well, today we're diving into a research paper that tries to do just that.
Not with a crystal ball or anything.
No, with equations.
It's called Scaling Laws for Neural Language Models. And it looks for patterns.
Predictable patterns.
Yeah, in how language AI improves.
So instead of focusing on the code, this looks at the big picture.
Exactly, like how simply scaling up the basic parts of a language AI changes how well it works.
So what are the parts we're scaling?
3 main ones.
Okay.
The size of the model, they call that N. The amount of data it learns from.
Got it.
That's D.
Okay, D for data.
And then the computing power used to train it, that's C.
And D and C.
Yeah.
So we're basically supersizing everything. More data, bigger AI, more computing power.
Yeah, pretty much.
And that leads to better performance.
And the amazing thing is, it's predictable how much better. They found other factors, like the specific model architecture, they don't really matter as much.
So size really does matter.
In the world of language AI, for sure, but it's not just about random growth.
Right.
It's about scaling those 3 things the right way. Model size, data size, and compute.
Let's break those down a bit more, starting with model size.
Okay, yeah.
So model size N is basically how much brain power the AI has.
You could put it that way. It's measured in parameters.
Parameter.
You can think of those as connections between the artificial neurons in the model.
More parameters, more brain power.
Generally, yeah.
Okay, what about data, or D?
That's like the fuel for the brain power. It's the amount of text the AI learns from.
It is measured in?
Tokens. Think of those as individual words or punctuation marks.
The bigger and more diverse the data, the more the AI has to learn from.
Exactly.
Makes sense. And finally, C for compute.
Right.
That's the raw computing power we use to train the model.
You got it.
It's like having a supercomputer working non-stop to train this AI.
You need that horsepower, especially with these massive models.
So we've got our giant model, tons of data, and a supercomputer cranking away. That's the recipe for a powerful language AI.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. They didn't just find that scaling matters.
What else?
It matters in a really predictable way.
Predictable how?
Performance improves along what's called a power law.
A power law.
Yeah, for each of those 3 factors. N, D, and C.
Okay, remind me about power laws. What are they?
It basically means the relationship between 2 things isn't linear.
Meaning?
Like doubling the size of the model doesn't just double the performance.
Oh, I see.
It might improve it, say, 1.5 times or something.
So there's a predictable pattern.
Right, a curve. And what's amazing is this pattern holds true over a huge range of sizes.
How huge?
Like, think the size of an ant compared to a blue whale. Kind of huge.
Well, okay. But I imagine training a model that big with that much data can't be easy.
It definitely comes with challenges.
What kind of challenges?
One of the biggest is something called overfitting. As the AI gets bigger, you risk it memorizing the data instead of actually learning the patterns of language.
It's like a student who crams for a test but can't actually apply the knowledge.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. An overfit AI, it won't do well with new data it hasn't seen before.
So it's a problem. But did the researchers find a way to deal with overfitting?
They did. You need to give it more data as the model grows.
The more data to prevent overfitting.
Right. But the good news is, you don't need as much more data as you might think.
Really?
The amount you need increases slower than the model size.
So you don't need to drown it in data.
Not quite. They even came up with an equation for this.
An equation.
Basically, for every 8 times you increase the model size, you only need about 5 times more data.
That's not as bad as I thought.
That's manageable.
Okay, so we've got the model size and the data. What about the training process itself?
Yes. There's a lot to optimize there, too.
What do you mean?
Most AI training, it's not done in the most efficient way.
Really?
Yeah, you can improve things a lot by tweaking the batch size.
Batch size?
You know how you feed information to the AI in chunks?
Uh-huh.
The size of those chunks, that's the batch size.
I see.
And there's a sweet spot for it. Too small, you're not using your computing power well. Too big, the learning slows down.
It's all about balance.
Exactly. And this research actually tells you how to calculate the best batch size.
Wow. So they give you a formula for that.
It's a bit technical, but yeah.
Okay.
They figure out the optimal batch size for different models.
That's super helpful.
Very practical.
So we've learned that size matters.
In a predictable way.
We need to manage overfitting.
And we can optimize the training process. But this is all about making powerful AIs.
Right. What if you have limited computing power? What then?
That's where it gets really interesting. They found some counterintuitive stuff about that.
Like what?
If you have limited compute power, the best thing to do is actually train a really big model.
Wait, really? Even if you have to stop training early?
Yep.
That doesn't make sense. Why not just focus on a smaller model that you can fully train?
It all comes down to how efficiently the model learns. Those power laws we talked about.
Yeah.
They apply here too. Bigger models, they're just way better at learning from the data.
Even if they don't train as long?
Even then, they learn more with each step. Smaller models, they have to chew on the data for much longer to get the same results.
So bigger models are like super learners?
Kind of, yeah. It's like if you could only take a few cooking lessons.
Yeah.
Better to train with a master chef for a short time than with someone less experienced for longer.
That's a good analogy. So the research says if you have limited computing power, go big.
Go big or go home.
This is fascinating. But it makes me wonder, is there a limit to how good these language AIs can get?
Now you're getting to the heart of it. That's a question they wrestle with in the paper.
What do they think?
They found something in their own predictions that suggests there might be a limit. It might come from the inherent entropy of language itself.
Great. Entropy. Isn't that from physics?
It is, but it also applies to information theory. In this case, it's about how random and unpredictable language is.
So you're saying there's a limit to how much meaning we can get from language? Because it's inherently ambiguous.
That's one interpretation. Like there's a certain level of noise in human communication.
And even the most advanced AI might not be able to filter out all that noise.
Maybe. It raises questions about human understanding too.
Yeah, like are we limited in the same way?
Yeah.
Or do we have some special ability to deal with ambiguity that AI doesn't?
Those are big questions.
Questions this research is just starting to explore.
It's like we're using AI to understand ourselves better.
Yeah, like holding up a mirror to our own minds.
Exactly. It's not just about building smart machines. It's about understanding intelligence itself.
And the nature of language.
Absolutely.
We've covered so much ground.
Yeah, from scaling laws to the future of AI to philosophy.
What's next on our deep dive?
Now that we've got the what and the why, let's get into the how.
The practical stuff.
The research actually has some really actionable advice for anyone working with language AI.
Perfect. Let's dive into that.
Let's do it. Ready to get our hands dirty and talk about making AI training better?
Let's do it. I love practical tips, especially for something as complicated as AI.
Okay, so this paper, it actually gives us a plan for optimizing AI training, even if you don't have a ton of resources.
That's what we need.
And it all goes back to those three things we've been talking about: model size, data size, and compute power.
N, D, and C.
Right. The building blocks. But it's not just about throwing more of everything in.
There's more to it.
You need to find the right balance. And the research, it's like a map for doing that. And the craziest thing they say is, don't be afraid to train a big model.
Even if you have to stop early.
Even if you have to.
I'm still wrapping my head around that. Why not just stick with a smaller model you can fully train?
Because bigger models, they just learn so much faster.
Ah.
They're like sponges, soaking up information. You get more bang for your buck, even with limited training time.
So it's not just about how long you train, it's about how much the model can learn in each step.
Exactly. You get it.
It's like, I don't know, if you want to learn to cook, better to have a few lessons with a top chef than a whole course with someone less experienced.
I like that. Okay, now let's move on to something else super important. Batch size.
We talked about that before, but I need a refresher.
Yeah, no problem. Batch size, it's like the pace of the learning process.
The pace?
You're feeding the AI information in chunks, right?
Yeah, batches.
Right, and the size of those chunks, that's what matters. Too small, and you're wasting your computing power.
Like trying to water a garden with an eyedropper.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But too big. And the learning, it gets messy.
It's all about finding that balance again.
Always about balance.
So how do you find that perfect batch size?
They actually give you a way to calculate it. They call it the critical batch size. It's based on how much the training jiggles as the AI learns.
Jiggles.
It's a technical term. But basically, you want enough movement to show the AI is learning, but not so much that it goes crazy.
Okay, finding the right amount of jiggle.
There you go. Now, once you've got the batch size figured out, there's one more thing. How many steps do you train for?
How long you let the AI cook, so to speak.
Exactly. And you might think bigger models, you need to train them longer, right?
Yeah, that's what I would have thought.
But this research, it says something different. If you have a limited amount of computing power, the number of training steps, it should actually increase very, very slowly as your model grows.
Really? So it's not about training forever?
Not necessarily. There's a point where you're not getting much benefit from more training. It's like baking a cake.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
You've got the right ingredients, the oven's at the right temperature. You don't need to bake it for hours and hours.
You just need the right amount of time.
Perfect analogy.
So to sum up, train a big model, find the right batch size, and don't worry too much about training for super long.
You got it. It's a whole new way of thinking about AI training.
It's not just about bigger is better, it's about smarter is better.
I like that. And this new way of thinking, it leads to some pretty big questions about, well, everything.
Like what?
Like, we talked about entropy, that fuzziness of language. If AI struggles with that, does that mean we have some special ability to understand? Or are we limited in the same way?
Deep stuff.
It is. It's like, are we just really good information processors? Or is there something more to human understanding?
Something AI can't quite grasp yet.
Maybe. It's like this research is less about replicating human intelligence and more about figuring out what intelligence even is.
What makes us different from machines.
Exactly.
Maybe AI, instead of replacing us, will help us understand ourselves better.
Like holding a mirror up to our own minds.
Seeing how we think.
And realizing what makes us unique. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right. We're still figuring all of this out.
But that's what makes it so exciting. Who knows what we'll discover next?
That's a good point. So, back to reality for a minute. What does this research mean for how we actually build language AIs?
It means we need to rethink some things. Like this idea that we always need bigger and more complex models.
Maybe there's a better way.
Maybe the key is to get better at training the models we already have.
Make them more efficient.
Right. Squeeze every bit of learning out of the data and the computing power we've got.
It's like instead of buying a bigger oven, we learn to become master bakers.
Perfect.
We refine our techniques.
And we need to understand how all these different factors work together. The batch size, the training time, everything. This research, it gives us a much better understanding of all that.
So we can fine-tune things.
Exactly. It's a smarter approach.
It's not about brute force anymore.
No more just throwing more computing power at the problem.
It's about understanding how AI learns. And using that knowledge to build better AI.
More efficient AI.
AI that's more in tune with how humans use language.
You're getting it.
This has been an amazing deep dive. From scaling laws to training tips to the philosophy of language, we've covered it all.
It really shows how the study of AI is intertwined with the study of ourselves.
It's about understanding both machines and minds.
Absolutely. And who knows what breakthroughs are waiting for us.
Maybe AI will help us unlock the full potential of human understanding.
Maybe it'll help us understand what understanding even means.
Now that's something to think about.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. Scaling laws, AI training, even philosophy.
It's been pretty deep.
But before we wrap up, I want to go back to those practical tips you mentioned.
Yeah.
What can people who are actually building language AIs do to make their training more efficient?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that we need to rethink what bigger is better means.
We've talked about using bigger models, even with limited training.
Right. And it's not about just blindly making the models bigger. It's about being smart about it.
Finding ways to make the training process more efficient.
Exactly. Instead of always reaching for the most complex model, maybe we should be asking, can we get better results by training a slightly smaller model in a smarter way?
It's about maximizing what we can get out of the resources we have.
Exactly. And that means thinking carefully about how model size, data size, and compute power all work together.
We've talked about finding the right balance. What are some practical steps researchers can take to do that?
Well, the first step is to really assess your computing resources.
Okay.
If you have limited compute power, it might be better to train a large model for a short time than to try to fully train a smaller one.
Because those larger models can learn faster.
Right. They extract more from each piece of data, even with less training time.
So it's not all about how long you train, it's also about the model's capacity to learn.
Exactly. And it goes back to that idea of finding the sweet spot, the right balance between model size, data, and training time.
And of course, there's batch size too. We talked about the critical batch size.
Right.
Why is that so important?
Batch size, it's all about controlling the rhythm of the learning.
The rhythm.
Yeah, you're feeding information to the model in chunks, those batches. And if the batches are too small, you're not really using your computing power efficiently. But if they're too big, things can get messy. The learning can become unstable.
So it's about finding that Goldilocks zone.
Exactly. Not too big, not too small.
But just, right. How do you actually figure out what that critical batch size is?
The research actually gives you a method for doing that.
They do.
It's based on looking at how much the training process jiggles as the model learns.
Jiggles.
It's a technical term.
Okay.
But basically, too much jiggling and the learning process becomes unstable. Too little, and the model might not be learning as well as it could.
So you want to hit that sweet spot.
Just the right amount of jiggle.
It's like finding the right tempo in a piece of music.
Great analogy. Not too fast, not too slow. Just right to let the music flow.
This is really interesting stuff. It feels like we're moving beyond those brute force approaches to AI training and becoming more nuanced.
I agree, and it highlights how important it is to really understand how AI learns, how all these different factors interact. It's not enough to just build big models. We need to know how to train them effectively.
We're not just pushing the limits of AI, we're understanding the process of learning itself.
That's a great way to put it, and I think that's a key takeaway from all of this. The quest to understand AI, it's also a quest to understand ourselves.
We're using AI to learn about learning.
We're looking in the mirror, so to speak, and seeing how our own minds work.
It's amazing to think about.
It is. And it makes you realize that the pursuit of AI, it's not just about building smart machines. It's about pushing the boundaries of human knowledge itself.
That's a great note to end on. This has been a fantastic deep dive. We've gone from the theory of scaling laws to practical training advice to some pretty deep philosophical questions.
It's been a journey.
And to our listeners, I would say, keep exploring these ideas. Don't be afraid to question your assumptions. That's how we learn and grow.
And who knows, maybe by understanding AI, we'll unlock even deeper understanding of ourselves.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.